Do you ever get the feeling television isn't what it used to be?
So no.
Brexit means Brexit.
We had to take a compulsory course called Combat Propaganda.
Boris Johnson once declared that his life's ambition was to be king of the world.
Does Yevgeny Lebedev have any connection with the Russian spy machine? Well, yes.
Find deeply offensive. Where is the evidence?
I don't care if they find it offensive.
The fundamental problem with Facebook is that it is accountable to no one.
The government was advised to invest money in the NHS. The government aren't listening to the evidence.
The kind of world I want to bring my child into.
Welcome to our second edition of Friday Night Live from Byline TV, coming to you from the sunny studios of downtown Southwark. My name is Peter Jukes. I am executive editor of the Byline Times, and I'm joined, as usual tonight, by the editor of Byline Times, Hardeep Matharu.
Good evening. It's good to be back.
Good to be back on another Friday, a very, very busy week. We've got a lot coming up for you. So just looking ahead, we have, of course, Biden's inauguration, and we'll be talking to Caroline Orr, all the way from New York, about the power of QAnon and lies, and looking at whether Boris Johnson is still a Trumpocrat, left behind while Trump goes. We'll also look at an amazing video which came out last night, which has over 2 million views, of a fishing merchant from Devon who now regrets voting for leave because his business is being destroyed by Brexit. And we'll have lots else beside, including talking to the producer of that film and looking at some other issues like tweets of the week. But first, Hardeep, I mean, one of the ideas of Byline TV, wasn't it, was to be what you don't see on TV, and like Byline Times is what the papers don't say. So I always wanted Byline Times to be featured in, you know, the news review on Sky, but we didn't have that, so we decided to own news review. So let's go to the best front page today, and that's the front page of the Byline Times.
Of course.
Now that will give us a bit of the theme, because what's the headline we have here?
The headline is America returns to truth.
Britain still lost in lies. And that's kind of the theme of the first segment of our programme. Obviously, I think I found it a very moving day, just because it wasn't Donald Trump. But the inauguration on Wednesday, the whole world, well, had a sigh of relief. Didn't you feel that? Didn't you feel it was a momentous occasion? We're talking about the inauguration of President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, her role as the first ever woman vice president, the first ever black and Asian vice president is amazing in itself. But there was something else amazing about it. What was that?
Yeah, I think there was a collective sigh of relief. And also, they did it. You know, America survived 4 years of Donald Trump. And while I think it's been such a tumultuous time, I think the inauguration of Joe Biden really showed that, you know, American democracy, despite all of Trump's assaults, is very strong. And Biden talked in his speech about the guardrails of our democratic system, of our republic, the checks and balances, the Constitution, the values which are the groundwork of America. And I think, you know, they did hold up. You know, there was a peaceful transition of power. And really, well, just, yes. But we did see, you know, a decisive break with the Trump era. Biden was talking a lot about unity, a lot about how the only way forward now was for enough Americans to come together so they can all be, you know, marching forward as one nation. And truth, you know, truth was a real topic.
Just before we get to truth, because obviously that's our headline, and since you helped me write it and edit the paper, we have a lot to say about that. It wouldn't be unfair to say in discussions in the past that until recently you were rather skeptical about America. You had doubts that it was a functioning democracy. Has this last week changed your attitude towards America and the values of having that kind of written constitution and being a republic?
Well, it's an interesting question. I've never actually been to the United States. I'd love to go, Peter. I haven't actually been. I guess there was always the conception that America has these ideals and they're so strong and they're so embedded into the country. But the reality is quite different when you look at the inequality and the social injustices which are rife in America. And I guess my issue was always that gap is quite a large one. But the point is, America has something to aspire to. But more important than that, it has these sort of very, very important values which are baked in to the very fabric of what the political system stands for in America, and therefore is guiding practically what presidents do. And you know,
we saw that very clearly, didn't we? In that the power of the Constitution, the power of the courts. Now, most of those courts, or senior courts, and the Supreme Court have a lot of Trump nominees, but they refused to buy into or throw out the vote, especially in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia, where Trump contested it with no evidence, baseless claims of fraud. And they didn't bow. And that was particularly powerful. I suppose people have been suspicious about American democracy. I must say, by the way, just before I forget, we continue, that we're going to be talking for about 30 minutes and seeing various segments and discussion points, but we're going to have a private conversation only for Patreon members, where we can talk a bit more off the record, a bit more indiscreetly on Patreon after this live broadcast. But going back to that truth issue, Hardeep, I mean, he raised that 3 or 4 times in his speech, spoke about the value of truth. And as journalists, well, that was very reassuring after Trump has told something like 30,000 lies, hasn't he, in the last 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big concern, isn't it, for democracy in so many places, that if you don't have a commonly agreed set of facts, you know, well, what does a nation have? You just descend into lots of feelings and opinions and views. You know,
and
people living in different nations.
They aren't just, we're going to now, in a moment, go to New York, but views about conspiracy theories, views about whether the vote, the big lie, was the vote stolen? Did Trump really win by a landslide? Was there a lot of fraud? Oddly enough, only alleged in mainly cities with a lot of black people in. That can lead to violence. That's what we saw, wasn't it, on the 6th of January in the insurrection. The people who believe absurdities, as Voltaire says, can commit monstrosities.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens next, really. I mean, what happens to that sort of QAnon base, the sort of coalition of Trump supporters? I mean, they were quite varied. And whether that big lie follows through, you know, will it outlast Trump? I mean, that's a really pertinent question.
So, on that score, we're going to somebody who can tell us much more than we know, and that's Caroline Orr. She has written for us for the last 2 years since Byline Times started. She's quite a big figure on Twitter. She's also a behavioural scientist, an amazing writer in her own terms, and she has been looking particularly at disinformation, misinformation, and is writing for us soon an article on QAnon. So enough from us liners who don't know what we're talking about, and I'll hand over and I'll just ask Caroline Hardeep's question, and Caroline, by the way, is coming from television. Yes, indeed, my mic failed, the battery wore out, or it just got bored of me talking. I mean, one of the great things is building a studio during a lockdown, running around to find mics when all the stores are closed. But I'm back, and where we were was talking to the great expert on disinformation and journalism, Caroline Orr, all the way from New York. And Caroline, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you.
I am so sorry you lost me for a while. So I just wanted really, what I was asking you was about what do you think will happen to QAnon? And I'll just explain to the audience who doesn't know. Byron Times has been writing about this for 2 years now, a conspiracy theory which posits, ever since a guy called Q came onto some message boards and said he was a secret informant in the government, that there is a paedophile ring of cannibals running the Democratic Party, but Donald Trump knew all about it. On the last moment, before he would be re-inaugurated, have a second term, they'd all be arrested and put in prison. That didn't happen. Caroline, how do people believe these things? And where do they go now it turns out they weren't true?
Well, in answer to your first question, in terms of why do people believe these things, you know, a lot of times it's looking for answers for complicated things. It's wanting to make the world seem like a more predictable, controllable place when, especially when things are chaotic, which the last 4 years certainly would classify as chaotic. And it gives people a feeling of belonging. I mean, QAnon was, you know, really probably the most unique conspiracy theory sort of in modern times, because it was, you know, a digital thing, it was an offline thing, and it really made people feel like they were part of something. And now that none of those, you know, predictions came true, none of the promises played out, you have people who are just despondent, you know, who really believed that you know, if they trusted the plan, as you are often told if you follow QAnon forums, that if they just trusted the plan, things would work out, and they didn't. Now, in terms of where people are going to go from here, I think, you know, some are going to sort of come back to society and, you know, come back to reality. Some really are not, and that's, I think, the ones that we're concerned with is where they're going to go. A lot of tech companies have deplatformed them, so you know, the major QAnon forums and the major players in QAnon are no longer on the big social media platforms. They're on some of the smaller ones. The concern now, though, is that you have people who, you know, feel lost, who spent, you know, the better part of 4 years in some cases putting money and businesses and putting their families on the line, and all of that fell apart in a day. And so the concern is what happens to these people if they're recruited and they become targets for you know, violent extremist groups, and we're seeing some of that already. So, you know, the issue now is sort of how do we try to reintegrate them into society? And you know, I think the answer, one answer at least, is you know, to extend a hand to those who are willing to take it, and you know, not just mock them. They may have made bad decisions, but I don't think we want tens of thousands of people becoming radicalized because of a conspiracy theory.
So do you think there was I mean, it had some malign intent, obviously, when it came to the insurrection, that wasn't solely QAnon supporters. There were white supremacists, there were far-right militias. But do you think there was this line, save the children, that there were good intents corrupted by this theory, this conspiracy theory? And do you think it was organic, sort of happened by itself? Or, as some people suggest, it goes back to key actors like Bannon, social media, sort of activists who are often playing with our psychologies. Do you think there's a sense that these people were deliberately manipulated this way for a political goal, and that makes them more vulnerable in the future?
So I think I would separate out the people who were sort of the leaders of QAnon and the ones who really devoted their lives to, developing a following based on QAnon, versus the people who sort of later stumbled onto it and started taking part in it. I definitely think the people at the top, I mean, there are people who made a lot of money off of that. And, that was certainly not an accident. They knew what they were doing. They knew they were lying, and they knew they were selling lies to people. So I sort of separate those out from a lot of the followers of QAnon. I do think, it's for it to be as large of a phenomenon as it was, I find it hard to believe that it was entirely organic. It may have started that way, but I think, when people see the chance to make money off of something, it's not long before you see the big players jump into it. And I think there's a good chance that's what happened with QAnon. And like you said, now they did leave all of these people incredibly vulnerable. The people who made money off of it, they're just going to walk away. They have their money, they're done. They knew what they were doing all along. The people who bought into what they were selling, now we have to deal with them, basically.
And Caroline, conspiracy theories are not new. I mean, they've been prevalent in some very dark moments in history. I mean, are there any lessons that should be learned from the past, or do you think that what we're seeing now is quite a distinct phenomenon?
So you're right. I mean, conspiracy theories are very old, and the main difference with QAnon is how it proliferated across the internet, and how it made its way, into private Facebook groups and, family Facebook groups, and just really became, something that was everywhere, including all the way into the Oval Office. And so I don't think we've ever seen a conspiracy theory take on quite, that much movement. But the fundamental reasons that people believe in conspiracy theories and the fundamental purpose they serve psychologically is still the same, whether it's online or not. And, one of the things that conspiracy theories do that is really damaging to society is it kind of erases the idea of a shared truth. It erases the idea that, you and I have a shared truth, and it tends to make us focus. It lets us focus our discontent on what ends up being like an ever-widening circle of conspirators. Instead of focusing on, the actual political actors, we focus on these, sort of unspecified or sometimes specified groups of people that can lead, to dehumanization, violence, all sorts of bad outcomes. So I think, it starts though with that spiral of losing our faith and our shared truth and our ability to converse with each other on a level where the facts that I accept as true are the same facts that you accept as true. And I think really getting back to that, some basic facts and sort of agreeing that that's not up for debate.
How do we do that, Caroline? I mean, I don't know how you feel about the deplatforming of these people, and obviously platforms like Parler, which has now been taken off Amazon servers, which was a key vehicle for a lot of the discussions around the insurrection. Is that the way to do it? Is disengagement, disempowering, especially the monetization of it, part of the process, or is there another form of approach, a sort of dialogue that could be had?
There's there's debate about that, and I don't know that anybody has come to an agreement on sort of what is the best approach. In my opinion, the best way to do it is to build back people's faith in institutions. That includes the institution of journalism, and includes the institution of science, government, medicine, and make people see that they can trust those institutions. Don't ask them to trust them, let them see that they can demonstrate it. It takes time, but if you show people, and through transparency, through reliability, you can gain back the trust of some of those people who right now are really on the fringes of society and don't feel like those institutions are trustworthy or have their best interest at heart.
And Caroline, are you hopeful that Joe Biden will be able to unite America, as he mentioned many times in his inauguration speech? I mean, there's quite a lot for him to tackle coming into the White House, really.
It's a lofty goal. I am hopeful that he will get us closer. I think he has, I do think he has our best interests at heart. We right now are starting at a point where we're going to have a long period of cleanup before we can really start moving forward and really progressing. And unfortunately, the state of partisanship right now in politics in the U.S. and elsewhere is such that a lot of people are not going to accept, Biden's efforts, whether they're in good faith or not. And I really think this is a time when, bipartisanship is really going to be needed if we're going to build back, again, that fundamental faith in our institutions, in the ability of our institutions to work for the good of the people.
Well, Caroline, you talked about the importance of journalism and science, and we think you're a great avatar of that, and would remind you have a deadline for your piece on this for Byline Times by the weekend. We're publishing it on Monday, and I'm sure we can read more about it and understand more what you're saying, and hopefully have you back on soon on Byline TV.
Absolutely, I would love to, and yes, please come back this weekend and read the piece on it.
Lovely. Thank you, Caroline, so much.
Thank you.
So that's America, where there is a sign of hope. The glimmerings of light on the horizon and little buds, green shoots coming. Should we turn back to this sad, sorry plague island called the UK? Sorry, I didn't mean to get everybody in a downer there. So our second headline was Britain still lost in lies. Something made you realize this, a small interview with our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, which made you realize that kind of the culture wars which seem to be marginalized in America are still center stage here. Maybe we could have a look at that clip and see what it was that triggered Johnson and triggered you.
Let's have a look.
Do you think, as some senior politicians in Britain seem to, that President Biden is woke?
I can't comment on that. But what I know is that he's a fervent believer in the transatlantic alliance, and that's a great thing, and a believer in a lot of the things that we want to achieve together. And insofar as nothing wrong being woke, but what I can tell you is that I think that it's very, very important for everybody to, and certainly I will put myself in the category of people who believe that it's important to stick up for your history.
Well, what do you make of that, Hardeep? That was the most embarrassed look I've seen on Boris Johnson's face since last week.
Oh, it was such a revealing moment. I wrote a piece about it for Byline Times, and the first line was, it was a very simple question, but the terror it brought to the hollow eyes of our Prime Minister was deeply revealing. It was a really interesting moment. So for those not familiar with the term woke. I mean, it's exploded in popular use in recent years, but its origins was in the US black culture, and it's referring to people who were very alert to and actively taking steps to change structural ills such as racism, such as inequality. But it very much is a term which has been co-opted and weaponized by those on the right. You can see that very prominently in the US, where there's a whole crusade against wokies, lefties, activists, academics, historians, which are trying to raise awareness of these issues. And most prominently, of course, Trump has been the proponent of this, and we can still see that in his heirs, Senators Josh Hawley and Senator Ted Cruz. But what's interesting is that this is also really the playbook of the Boris Johnson regime, and we call it on Byline Times the sort of the Vote Leave regime, because that Vote Leave campaign that started with Brexit was underpinned by these sorts of attacks on people and scapegoating others, whether that be immigrants, people coming from Turkey, basically the sort of exploitation of xenophobic feeling, racism and othering, and divide and rule, which is that old imperial beloved tool.
But there's a common thread here, isn't there? Because
there is.
Though he likes to pretend it didn't happen, we have evidence, and Bannon himself said he advised Boris Johnson, and technically advised him. I think this one of his first bits of interventions in the public domain after he'd resigned as Foreign Secretary, and basically the preamble to his leadership campaign in 2018 to take over Theresa May was going on about Muslim women looking like bank robbers and letterboxes, really stoking those culture wars.
Yeah.
And I think it was an independent journalist, John Stone or somebody, noticed that in Britain, the only people who use the term woke are Tory MPs now to rubbish it.
It's really interesting.
But what it seems to me is that there's Johnson stoking these culture wars just as the bigger battle, or the bigger war, stoking these culture battles, whereas Trump's lost the war.
So you refer to Bannon, and of course we mean Steve Bannon, who was Trump's former campaign manager, this sort of alt-right, far-right ideologue, very involved in the Breitbart site. He was the co-founder of Cambridge Analytica, the very controversial data analytics firm. But most importantly, we know from Chris Wiley, the Cambridge Analytical whistleblower, that Bannon was very much encouraging Trump to go with these policies like build the wall, drain the swamp, very divisive things. And yes, as you say, we know that Bannon was in touch with Johnson, and Johnson now, taking forward the division whipped up by Brexit, is on an anti-woke crusade. Because we saw this, just this weekend, Robert Jenrick, a cabinet minister, he had a column in the Telegraph newspaper headlined, "We will save our history from woke militants." We've seen it in the attacks on the supposed teaching of things like critical race theory in schools. Rule Britannia must be sung at the proms. All these debates about sort of the empire and statues, which have all been amplified and weaponized. But at the heart of it is divide and rule. So the reason why that clip, that moment was so telling was because Boris Johnson is at the head of the rump Trumpocracy in Britain.
But he can't admit it because he has a new president who has called him the physical and emotional clone of Donald Trump. That's what Biden has called Johnson. He's also obviously made racist comments about Joe Biden's former colleague Barack Obama, who is vice president too, and his Irish descent and all this stuff. So this isn't going to go down well. So in this final section, I think we look at why people have these culture wars, and often they're to distract from what's really going on. And the thing that's really falling apart at the moment now is Brexit, isn't it? We've seen it on our podcast. Adrian Goldberg spoke to a farmer who makes seed potatoes, cannot export them to Europe or Northern Ireland. But even more amazingly, our Byline TV team, Kaylin and George, went to film a guy called Ian Perks, who was a senior, it was in the New York Times, very pro-Brexit in 2016, saying all these things. They went back to see him and asked him how he felt about Brexit now. We'll watch that film and then we'll come back and Hardeep will talk to Caroline about making that film.
Yeah, you know, if I could turn the clock back, would I have voted leave? Of course not. I don't want to stay in. You know, it's for the future of my family, not so much me. You know, I'm coming to the end of my career. But to go forward, I think me and many others have perhaps made a mistake. I just thought there'd be a better future for myself and for my children and my children's children, to become independent, to have our own fishing grounds, to be able to be independent, to be able, you know, for Europe to rely on us. The reality is we're now January 20. We've yet to send a consignment to Europe from Brixham. It's just been an absolute nightmare. I think I was sort of taken along on the ride that we were all on, with the bus going around. You know, we were going to save £350 million per week that we're throwing into Brussels, that we're going to have this free trade, and Europe were going to be desperate for our fish because we'd have control of it all, and we'd be in control of our own destiny.
The key is we've got our fish back. They're now British fish, and they're better and happier fish for it.
Very disappointed with the comments. Rees-Mogg, you know, happy fish, please. Happy fish, you know. I don't think there's any room to make any jokes about this current situation. 44 years I've been selling fish, and overnight it's pretty much been destroyed.
How would you describe the news?
Disappointed, very disappointed, and yeah, I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel as we speak.
And now I'm joined by Caroline Robertson, Byline TV's producer, who met Ian Perks this week. Hi, Caroline. Thanks for joining us in front of the camera. How did you track Ian Perks down?
So I saw all of the trucks that were protesting outside Downing Street earlier this week, and there was just so much information online and so many different messages about all of these fishermen and shell fishermen who were really, really upset by all of the regulations that were going on with Brexit and all of the sort of latest hits. So what I really wanted to do was put a human face to the story. So you have a lot of headlines, you have a lot of numbers, you know, on the sort of media, it sort of talks about protests and things, but you haven't really seen anyone who was really, really sitting there and describing how they felt about it and actually describing what happened. So I started looking people up who had said in 2016 that they wanted to leave, that they wanted Britain to be out of the European Union. And he came up. And I was looking at some of the stuff he might have said recently, and he had given an interview saying that maybe his business was being affected by it. So it was quite like a long shot. I thought a lot of these people might feel a little bit embarrassed talking to the media, might feel a little bit kind of, you know, like people might make fun of them. But I emailed him anyway, and he was, you know, a bit reluctant, but he was like, okay, sure, I'll give you a few minutes. So we drove down, and he was quite shy. He was like, oh, I think he said something about how big, he was worried about, you know, big sort of liberal media types would be coming from London and looking for people like him to sort of humiliate and laugh at and say, look, I told you so. And I basically told him that I voted leave as well, which I did in 2016. I was brainwashed like he was. I listened to Farage and I listened to all these people, and I thought that they were right about, you know, Britain would be better off. I, you know, was a sucker for all that propaganda, and I told him that, and I was like, I'm disappointed too, and I was led down a dark path too, and I understand. He was quite surprised by that, but it just, he just, after that, like, opened up loads. He was a lot more honest. He was super, super chill, and he opened up and gave us like one of the most humble, sincere, honest interviews that I've ever conducted with someone. And it resonated so much. I mean, now it has something like 2 million views, and I think so many people watch the news, they watch the headlines, and they see these numbers, they see divisive figures, they see Faraz versus this person, that versus that, and everyone's really, really riled up. But for the first time, this is someone who could be your uncle, who could be your brother, who could be your dad, who's just saying, I was brainwashed by these people, and how it actually affected those people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was quite powerful. I have a huge amount of respect for him for coming forward and saying I was wrong.
And like you say, that human story is so important, because watching that video, you can see the regret written all over his face. What do you think was driving his decision to speak out? Like you said, he didn't have to speak to you, but I mean, and in some ways, you know, the reception to what he was saying could prove quite controversial. You know, well, you know, what did you expect when you believed the lies on the big red bus? So what was it that he felt he wanted to sort of contribute by actually holding his hands up and saying, I don't think I made the right decision here?
I think it was just feeling isolated and feel completely left alone. Like he continually told us in the longer version, which you can see on the Patreon page, that he used to watch Nigel Farage all the time on the TV, gunning and supporting and celebrating the fishing industry and working class fishermen. And he was like, he's just not here anymore. He's nowhere to be found. He's completely silent. Maybe you know where he is. I don't know what's happening. And I think that kind of compelled him to come out and speak about it, because he felt like maybe now no one represents them. Now they've been left to their own devices. Like they've been used as pawns, and they've been put on a pedestal, and they've been held up as this great working class industry. And now all those people are just, you know, cricket noises. And I think that's kind of the main thing that made him want to speak out, because I think these people want people to listen to them, and clearly people want to hear it. People, regardless of those on the Remain side who think that, you know, we had a lot of comments saying, oh, he deserves it and things like that. But I think the majority of people that voted Remain in this country would feel sympathy for someone like that, would say that they've always still wanted people like that's interest at heart, and they voted Remain because they wanted to stop it from happening. So I think it was just feeling isolated and feeling like there was no one else to speak for them.
I think what I really liked about that report was that it didn't put any preconceived ideas onto it. It was merely, you could hear this fisherman's tale and sort of decide what you felt about it emotionally and intellectually. And of course, I think the question going forward is, well, we're completely polarised over Brexit, it seems, and that may not go away anytime soon. But I think, you know, kind of promoting that understanding of people, why they made the decision, where they are now, could potentially be a way forward. But like you say, it's sort of, I mean, it's still a split camp between those who say, well, people like this should get everything they deserve, because why did they vote for this? And others who say, well, it's not their fault, they were lied to, so we should reach out to them now to build bridges and go forward together.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance to get as well. I mean, if you watch the mainstream media, if you watch BBC or any channels like that, it's pitching two of the people that claim to represent those industries against each other, and it's numbers and it's statistics and it's protesters and it's grandiose events. I just think the most important thing, if you want to actually engage and actually, you know, learn something and sort of grow, and grow your understanding of what's going on, it needs to be done from listening to these human stories and from listening to individuals who are actually affected by it all. And I think that's the most powerful way for people to kind of really understand what the effects of the propaganda is that have been pumped against them. And we just want to keep as much as possible pursuing just that format.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
telling human stories and telling the stories of the people that the mainstream media don't.
And understanding.
Yeah.
It's important, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, Ian Perks wasn't the only person affected by Brexit that Byline TV has spoken to. Last year, we had an in-depth documentary with Tom Howard, whose family have been oyster farming for 300 years. But this week, Byline TV caught up with him again. Let's take a look.
We were supplying Spain, Belgium and Germany regularly, and sending a healthy amount to each of those countries. But Brexit alone, we've lost them completely as customers. We've just lost them. We physically can't send oysters to them anymore because of the cost that's involved with that paperwork.
And we asked you for some of the examples of the paperwork, and you sent us through 3 examples of paperwork saying, you know, this certainly isn't all of it, but here are a few things that you should know about. You should know about the certificate of origin that we have to complete now, certificates of health that need to be completed, catch certificates which now need to be completed, and this one from HM Government which you sent us, which I'm looking at on my phone, needs signatures all over the place. We need a signature from the master of the receiving vessel, we need a signature from the transshipment authorization within a port area, another signature for name and address of exporter, another one from flag state authority validation, another one on the importer declaration with their name and address. So this has to pass through a lot of people's hands. This is time consuming, right?
Very time consuming. And the thing is that with the health certificate alone, which needs one signature for the export health certificate, which basically is saying that your product is safe for human consumption, you need one person from local authority, environmental health officer, to sign that. But that alone takes a lot of time and a lot of emails or phone calls. We can't do that in the new system because there's no way at 10 a.m. I'll be able to then get hold of my environmental health officer to sign a certificate by the end of the day that day. I wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, another sad story. I think there's an analogy for me, Hardeep, between QAnon and Brexit, apart from Cambridge Analytica, and, well, at least with Trump and big lies, is this delicate balance, isn't it? Blaming the con men, but not the conned. Caroline said that. And the people make money out of this and the people who suffer. And I think we as a country, as America, is going to have to find a way forward, not just to say, as some people have already been saying, you deserve this happening to me. Tom, by the way, Tom and his brother Joe, who writes for Byline Time, voted Remain. And all their industries are suffering. So we're at an end here, at least for the public part of this discussion. For the very, very special few of you, you can join us for a Q&A in about 5 minutes on Patreon, and we'll answer all those tricky questions. Q&A about QAnon. Meanwhile, we're not GB News, which turns out this week, as you'll discover on Byline Times, to be funded mainly by foreigners. We're funded by you. We answer to you. There's no oligarchs. I wish I was one. Stephen, my co-founder, doesn't look like an oligarch to me. And you look after us and you tell us what you want us to report and think. So for you guys, join Patreon, come and join us for Q&A. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back at the same time next week. Bye-bye.